Hey everybody, it's January 6th at approximately 9:30 a.m. my time. And boy, I'll tell you, this message is primarily to all of the new and unfortunately unemployed folks in the tech sector. I read about a lot of layoffs happening across the board, of course, from, we knew about Twitter a while ago, but then, of course, Microsoft and I know Amazon and I believe, ongoing at Meta and the other major platforms are all kind of doing the same. And I think a lot of this was predictable from the end of the year based on, you know, where we are in the economy. I mean, the interpretation seems to be at the moment that it's like, oh yeah, because of the stimulus and the easy money lending policies of the Federal Reserve that, corporate America, particularly in the tech sector, got in over its head, hired too many people more than they needed. There wasn't a market for it. And so now, the revenue streams are down and the basics of, economics are, sticking and stinging and no upside. And so, the likes of WeWork laid off a lot of people yesterday and their stock went up. And that's kind of the situation we're in. And so a whole lot of people out there are probably the new minted underclass, unfortunately, in a situation that I found myself in 2008 based on, things are going along really well. You've got the job, you've got the house and the family, and you start putting things on credit card and you get over your skis in debt. And the next thing you know, you lose your income. And then it's just a mammoth wipeout. And then suffering abounds and it hurts and there's no easy fix. And what I am here to tell you is that there's a reason things work the way they do, that it's more than the business cycle. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I'm a television producer and investigative journalist, and I've done a series that is a monumental series, and it becomes more and more evident to me every day, even though I've been in quicksand and screaming from, the mountaintops that the emperor wears no clothes for a very long time, because I've had an inside look at the way our system works, our economic system, our political system, our financial system, how it all comes together, who's in charge for what reason and why, and how this all manifests. And it all comes together, most notably because of the terrible reality of what took place over the course of the last 20 years that everybody in media seems to be missing because they're either paid to not be aware of this stuff or they're just simply, I'm going to call them goats. Not even sheep, they're goats, okay? And that's an insult to goats because I like mountain goats. But anyway, the idea is that everybody in media is chasing the cycle, the echo chamber, and everybody wants to know what the next cool thing is, and yet nobody can kind of see the forest for the trees for what we are. I mean, the myth is that we're a democracy for one. The other myth is that we have a capitalist structure where in the economy, I mean, going back decades, the idea is that the best rise to the top, and you see a need, fill a need, and that's what moves the economy forward. And there's winners and losers, and basically in the end, it's really what's best for the consumer. I mean, in the old days, they used to say what's good for GM is good for the country. Now, I guess a lot of people might say, well, what's good for Wall Street is good for the country. Well, if you watch the Bernie Madoff story, and I'll tell you, I was a little bit critical initially the last couple of days on these truth bombs, but not so much from a perspective of the quality of the production. There's this new Netflix series called Bernie Madoff, The Monster of Wall Street. What I was critical of is, and I hate anybody who goes to this guy from the New York Times, a guy by the name of Andrew Ross Sorkin, sorry, who's also, he's at the New York Times, he's also on CNBC, and he's had, he's kind of like the focal point of, I don't know, Manny's business revelations for I don't know how long, but he was part and parcel to basically covering up what happened in the 2008 great financial crisis. And the way he was utilized early in the Bernie Madoff story, the monster of Wall Street, is to do what everybody does when they talk about Bernie. They talk about he's the largest Ponzi scheme in history. And the way that the actual series starts off is that it puts a lot of the elements together of what was taking place in the 2008 great financial crisis meltdown. That puts together a sort of a context to where Bernie was at that time to then backtrack and get on the story. And initially, because I've seen this over and over and I've heard it over and over, and I thought I kind of understood the Bernie story, pretty well, maybe, more so than is typically kind of, echoed in the mainstream media. But I'll tell you, the series is astounding. not only because it parallels and it does almost magically exactly what we do on the con. In fact, if you look at the episode capsules, it's almost a mirror image of what it was we did. And kudos to the filmmakers, and I'm not saying that sarcastically. I mean, what I have watched, and I'm through episode 3, and I'll get to episode 4 tonight, but they have revealed just this construction where it's so easy to understand exactly what Bernie was up to. But it was a lot more involved than I had initially understood. I was aware, on the periphery, if you will, all of the mechanics of what I thought Bernie was involved with, particularly the affinity fraud, and the way that they established that in this documentary series. And affinity fraud is when you trust somebody, a group of your society, a member of your society, and they earn your trust, and then only to be betrayed by them. And Bernie did that in a monumental way to the Jewish community, particularly down in Florida, which is sad and sickening. But it's also sad and sickening that so many people were so easily, you know, shall we say, like everything that we present in the con and everything that we've done in our microdocs that you can find on our website at www.thecon.tv. If you look at videos, you can see about 30 different microdocs that spell a lot of this stuff out. A lot of it might seem academic, but it's extremely important because you see all of these elements in the Bernie Madoff series, but they don't tell you what we're talking about or what it actually is. And so, for example, affinity fraud is someone could go into any type of group, an organization. It could be a church. It could be a Boy Scout group. It could be well, fill in your favorite organization, right? And then they can use that to predate upon people to get them suckered into a scenario. Now, Bernie ultimately does that, and he gets to the point where eventually, because he's mocking up these numbers that are astronomical, and people start to get wind that this guy is the guy with the Midas touch and all that sort of thing, and everybody wants to come to him, and so he picks and chooses his clients, and that's all basically a Gresham's dynamic scenario. It's fishing for fools, and it's also a psychological scenario. And people, particularly in cliques, want to chase the guy who's got the hot hand, and it's just like charisma, sort of magnetic quality, but it's really just predicated on everybody chasing the myth, particularly unrealistic returns in this case. So the due diligence is out the window. You've heard that a lot recently with a lot of analysis as it relates to Sam Bankman-Fried and the FTX turmoil and everything that's going on in the crypto space, and there's much more to it. But reverting back to the Bernie story, I was aware of that, and I was aware of some of the things I'm just about to touch upon. But the way the filmmakers present this was even monumentally bigger than I had initially understood. So Bernie ultimately vectors into getting a lot of investment capital from overseas, particularly in Europe, by playing all the right hands. And again, they followed through fishing for fools, very similar to the Jewish community down in Florida. And what's really fascinating by this is that in the con, we present that, in fishing for fools, and I think a lot of people get a little prickly when they start to think about this, but nobody wants to feel like they've been targeted or set up, or that they were vulnerable, or whatever the case is. But we see over and over and over with financial frauds, people fall victim to this stuff all the time. The housing crisis was colossally, I mean, that's not even the adjective that I want to use in this particular case. It was immensely larger than what unfolds in the Bernie Madoff story. But what is intriguing to me, and I knew about it before because I remember everybody was saying at the time, look, the only reason Bernie went down is because he screwed over rich people. Okay, that's partially true, and I'm sure they'll get to that in episode 4. But rich people are just as vulnerable to fraud and all of these elements of Gresham's dynamic and what we call the Lucifer effect. When I'm mixing metaphors, but when bad ethics drives good ethics out of the marketplace, and people become prey to it because of asymmetric information and the psychology of what they want to believe. Now, in the Bernie Madoff story, the most amazing part of it so far that I've seen, especially because it parallels again what we do in the con, and in the con it's monumentally larger in terms of what the story imbues. But in this case, trust me, it's large enough to understand that this gentleman, and I knew about this, I guess again on the periphery, but a gentleman who was working at a hedge fund, who was this quant, math expert guru who understood all the different ways that you can hedge risk. His name is Markopoulos, I think is how you pronounce his name. And this guy and his team recognized right away that what Bernie was doing was bullshit. It was impossible. And it took him all but like, I don't know, a 2 hour session to try to unmask this thing because they wanted to compete with it. And they were looking at it and they were like, well, wait a second. If we do this, we run the risk of like, I think it was 60% loss in the first 2 months or something like that. That would be the hedge, with this statistical expert. And, and that's the whole point of due diligence and hedge funds and why you put your money there to begin with. And so these guys are revealing not only to, competitors because they're trying to earn the business that it's all bullshit, but then they also notify Barron's, which is a financial publication, which does a deep dive in the early 2000s and actually is like, how is this working in terms of Bernie's story? And the way they show that he gets away with it because it goes public, but then it doesn't create kind of like a grass fire and everybody in media is talking about it, because eventually what happens is Bernie's ironically saved by 9/11. So what happens is a lot of, and this happened in the 2008 financial crisis also, was that a lot of the professionals and the personnel at the Securities and Exchange Commission get reassigned to deal with like international terrorism funding and that sort of thing. So they're not focusing on Bernie or, quite frankly, Wall Street. And what you end up finding is that everybody knew what was going on. They told the press goes public with it, and people are still buying into it. In this particular case, rich people. Well, the same thing happened in 2008, but with a lot more people, middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, poor people, everybody who was in what turns out to be the largest conspiracy and cover-up in history. And I'm not talking about Bernie. I'm talking about the con. Because ultimately what you see in Bernie was that Bernie doesn't get taken down by anything except for the meltdown of 2008. So try to square this, right? So ultimately, if Bernie is the largest, Ponzi scheme in history, but it wasn't until the great financial crisis buried Bernie that he went down. Do you understand this mental gymnastics in this game of deception by media? What I'm reminded of over and over, I know we've gotten censored. I know we've gotten canceled. I know the system and the players who've done everything from the beginning of the meltdown in 2009, and I know how they span back to these major players to the S&L crisis, and how it works with the Federal Reserve and everything else. And I had a conversation with, really the ultimate expert in all of this stuff. And I'm kind of switching gears and I'm being a little bit vague, but I hope you'll bear with me on this thought that, I asked him, look, man, am I just grasping at straws here based on what I'm revealing about the Federal Reserve and what the Federal Reserve did in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis that nobody understands, that puts this whole thing together? And I'm the only guy that seemingly has the balls to bring this forth to the American people. And I said, am I getting it wrong in any way with my vernacular when I say what the Federal Reserve did was illegal? He's like, no, in a normal world, based on normal lending capacity and based on normal structures. And he said, but what you need to understand is that the Federal Reserve can do whatever it wants, ultimately, and that the only backstop to that is Congress, that's supposed to regulate the Federal Reserve and be accountable, or the Federal Reserve accountable to Congress. But that's not the case. And so ultimately, in a financial system, when things go disarray, when the entire world melts down because of financial fraud at levels that you can't even, it's Godzilla financial fraud is what it is. And ultimately, the Fed can just do what it wants to backstop this thing and make it all go away and etch a sketch tens of millions of people that get destroyed in the court system illegally and all of these other things that we reveal. Yeah, that's what they can do because nobody's going to stop them. I'm reminded of Tom Murphy, a gentleman who came from the Akron-Summit County task force that got the only RICO conviction of this crime in the entire country that ended up, taking down tens of millions of people and costing this country tens of trillions of dollars. That just goes to a racketeering enterprise. We found the only RICO conviction of this story that should have taken down every CEO on Wall Street. But every CEO on Wall Street and every major financial firm in the shadow sector that it imbues, they have complete control. They fund everybody. So we were canceled. We're the show that BlackRock can't have you see. And I guess I'm reaching out to all of the newly found, unemployed people. That's like, look, man, you're going to be desperate. Your life's going to be miserable, and you're expendable. They don't, like George Carlin said, give a fuck about you. They really don't. And so what I'm trying to say is that we live in this system That's not what we think it is. The notion that no person or company is above the law is horseshit. When Bernie Madoff goes down and Sam Bankman-Fried go down, trust me, they're not the system. They're outliers, but they play the game the system has allowed them to play. And it's a lot bigger than they are, okay? So that's what I'm trying to bring to your attention. It's out there, www.thecon.tv. You know, I'm moving forward in a lot of ways, so hopefully I'll be able to break through this story. But every day I'm just reminded of how huge the information is that we have that could change this country and get the country back that we think it all is, but it's not. You have to understand the emperor's new clothes. The system is a fraud. Everybody at the top of the system is above the law. They have absolute impunity, and they fancy themselves the divine right of kings, which is completely antithetical to being an American. And the fact that I've got to explain that to you is ridiculous. Where are all the people who believe that country has to be accountable to the law, to the Constitution, all of these things that all of these right-wingers always claim that they thump, you know, they do Constitution thumping like Bible thumping, and it's all a bunch of hypocrisy most of the time. They don't even know how the system works. All this shenanigans, it's not even shenanigans. It's just, you know, basically a civil war on the right with the Speaker of the House, and, you know, I guess we're going to get into the 8th vote today and whatever that means, because ultimately, if they get up to the system where they can't increase the debt ceiling, we're going to have fucking massive calamity on our hands, okay? Because therein lies the irony of this whole situation. Monetary policy is not fiscal policy, but there's a lot to it baked in that you have to become educated by. And as far as I can tell, I'm the only guy that's got the information out there. If you're just coming into this, check out www.thecon.tv. Check out the new Untouchables on YouTube. Check out Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con on YouTube. We're on TikTok. And also I did an amazing what I call a filibuster to the grand jury of the American people that landed on 11/1/22, which is on YouTube. And it has mind-blowing information that includes David Enrich from the New York Times and Art Wilmarth, who's the leading legal scholar on financial policy in the entire country, quite frankly. And yeah, I'm not just some blowhard talking a bunch of noise. I've been on a lot of major podcasts. I've been covered by a lot of major publications and so forth, but it's not enough in this loud, exhausting, overwhelming information odyssey of disinformation and misinformation. One of these days, somehow, some way, somebody's going to realize that Patrick Lovell is the guy that had the goddamn truth that the entire country depended on, so that we can freaking purge this goddamn devil in the shadows. You know, I say the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. They must have thought I was some kind of new fool because they kept pissing on my head, telling me it was rain. I'm not their sucker, man, and I don't know why you would continue to be either. I'm trying to give you the truth that can save our democracy and, quite frankly, the future. Please join me. Take care. Onwards and upwards.